So I began my adult life in a monastery as a seeker, drawn by the path of awakening and deep knowing. It was a powerful and formative experience. But after a couple of years, I realized I wasn't going to find what I was looking for there, so I left. And then, driven by the same impulse, I pursued degrees in physics and philosophy, which was also a powerful and formative experience. And then, I realized I had to make a living. Through a series of happy accidents, I landed in the building industry. It was exciting, and I was good at it. I loved seeing the tangible results of my efforts. And as long as there was another challenge in front of me, I was pretty happy. But as I grew into a successful business person, I gradually let the seeker in me recede, unconsciously learning to check my inner knowing at the door of the office so that I could succeed at life. It was like there were two Sandys. The inner Sandy, the seeker, much quieter, but still yearning for awakening, and the Sandy that the world saw, the outward Sandy, the professional businessman. And the two Sandys grew further and further apart over time. For many of us, there's a real disconnect between what we know at our deepest level and how we operate in the world. That disconnect is powered by a delusion, the belief that we're just not permitted to operate from that place of knowing. So back to my story. Fast forward about 20 years, and I woke up one day with the startling realization that I was leading a mercenary life. I was working for money and without purpose. Now, it happened at that time that I was putting together a project in my hometown of Philadelphia with a friend of mine who was the architect. We went out to lunch one day to talk about the approach, and during lunch he pulled out a magazine to show me a tiny article, it was maybe 3 column inches, that talked about the environmental impact of building. I was stunned. I'd been a lifetime environmentalist and outdoors person, but I'd never connected that passion with my work life. My need to understand it became an itch that I just couldn't stop scratching. And although I didn't understand why at the time, it created a tendril of connection between the inner Sandy and the outer Sandy that began to draw them together. I rejoined the path of awakening. A decade later, I found myself at the epicenter of the global transformation of one of the world's largest industries as chair of the U.S. Green Building Council. As I traveled back and forth across the country, meeting with communities of business people, I increasingly found myself called to speak from that place of inner knowing. And surprisingly, people responded. They were waiting for the invitation to operate from that place themselves. I realized then that the engine that was driving the massive change that I was witnessing had nothing to do with green buildings. It wasn't market demand or shifting economics or the lead rating system. It was the transformation of people who were waking up and discovering meaning in their lives. Their engagement in green building fostered a growing sense of connection to the rest of the human family and our planet home, eventually altering the way that they operated in every aspect of their lives. And it drew them together with a sense of common purpose. The nested, self-organizing networks that emerged as a result of their internal transformations changed an industry in less than a decade. So what was going on here? My own immersion in green building, let's call that the it, required me to examine the mental models that I used to construct my world. It fueled an inward journey, the I. As I met others who were having similar experiences, a deep sense of connection and common purpose emerged, the we. And the multiplier effect of the we accelerated the change we were seeking, the it. And so it went. I stumbled on this relationship or cycle, the I, the we, the it, accidentally from my front row seat in the midst of change. But I now know that this is a pattern that is at the root of all successful movements. and that we can use it to intentionally accelerate change. So, the nugget that I want to share with you is this. To most effectively nurture systems change, begin by focusing on the I, tending to your own awakening and the awakening of others. One of my teachers calls this the definition of love, the fearless and unrelenting commitment to respond to the need for awakening in oneself and the other in every moment. So back to my story. During that period when I was gallivanting around the country for the U.S. Green Building Council, I realized that everywhere that I went, I was hearing the same refrain. We're committed. We want to do this work, but we can't find the money. Before long, that became a new itch that I couldn't stop scratching. To borrow a metaphor from the building industry, I realized that finance was the pig in the pipe. But what a big pig! And how do you change that? Well, the answer is the same way you change any system. Begin with the I. The process of awakening transforms the mental models or paradigms that underlie any system that we're trying to change. And to paraphrase the late Donella Meadows, the transformation of paradigms is the most powerful lever for systems change. Today, I use all of this knowledge in work that I do with two remarkable organizations. For the last 5 years, I've chaired BALLE, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. It's an organization that stands in service of economies that work for all life. Their work is grounded in the understanding that our relationships to each other matter more than any other element of economy. I'm also a senior advisor with RSF Social Finance. And RSF's purpose is to transform the way the world works with money. The shorthand for that transformation is from a financial system that is complex, opaque, anonymous, and focused solely on short-term return to a system that's direct, transparent, personal, and grounded in relationship. With RSF and BALLE, I help to convene and facilitate communities of practice. We call them circles, of individuals who are pioneering the pathways to this new economic system. Circles play a special role in systems change because when you connect them to each other, the synergy of pioneers can seed a tipping point where their pioneering practices, which are usually viewed as fringe, suddenly become the norm. This is exactly what I witnessed in 2006 when green building quite suddenly went from fringe to mainstream. To illustrate, here's a story of one joint RSF BALLE circle that begins at the intersection of their common focus on relationship-based economies. Now, the most effective way to build relationship-based economies is by fostering meaningful connections between people who are engaged in economic transactions. So farmers to eaters, consumers to producers, lenders to borrowers, and investors to the people in the businesses that they're investing in. That's what we call community capital. A few years ago, we noticed that there was some nascent energy building in the world of community foundations around this idea of community capital, and that represented a whole lot of systems change potential. There are over 900 community foundations in North America, and all of them are focused on the health and vitality of their places. Like most philanthropies, they invest their money, and they use the returns from those investments to make grants. But often, those investments are creating the very systems conditions that they're trying to solve with their philanthropy. So what if we could help them shift those investments, about $100 billion, almost all of which is parked on Wall Street, into their communities in alignment with mission? So we hunted down the pioneers and convened a circle of 12 foundation executives who had a fire in their belly to change their institutions. Over the course of the next 18 months, we came together in a series of immersive retreats designed to address the change we were seeking, the it. But the exploration of the it, the content in these retreats, was always joined with the exploration of the I. We used many different practices to support this inward journey and to grow each person's capacity and courage to work and lead from their place of deepest knowing. Because you see, as we awaken, the delusion that we cannot operate from that place evaporates. As always happens when you do this work together, the we emerged, and we fell in love with each other. Today, these leaders are working to deploy collective assets of over $2.5 billion into meaningful investments in their communities, and they're innovating like crazy. That's great. What's even greater is that they've owned responsibility for changing the field. They've developed a manifesto to broadcast that change to other foundations. But most importantly, each of them understands that tending to the I is absolutely foundational to their work in the world. And they now carry that understanding as leaders to their institutions and their communities. When we work for change, and I know that many of you do, we usually do a great job of focusing on the it. But it is tending to the I, the journey of awakening, that unleashes your full potential as leaders and change agents. And when you join your journey with the journey of others who also share your vision, then the power of we becomes unstoppable. Thank you.